Before the Civil War, the United States was a nation deeply divided. A fundamental question loomed large. Where did true power reside? The southern states, clinging fiercely to their way of life, believed in the sovereignty of individual states. They argued that states had the right to govern themselves and chart their own destinies, even if it meant breaking away from the Union. The North was initially hesitant to engage in a conflict that could permanently fracture the nation. The idea of a strong central government was met with suspicion by many who feared a repeat of the tyranny they had fought to escape during the American Revolution. The tension between state sovereignty and federal power was palpable, a powder keg waiting for a spark. The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 shattered the fragile peace and forced the nation to confront this fundamental question of power. The South's secession was a direct challenge to the authority of the federal government, and President Lincoln vowed to preserve the Union at all costs. The war that followed would reshape the balance of power in America. The conflict raged for 4 long years, leaving an indelible mark on the nation's soul. Battlefields were painted red with the blood of young men, both North and South, who fought for their beliefs. Families were torn apart, and the country faced an uncertain future. But amidst the chaos and bloodshed, a new America was being forged, one where the power of the federal government would be forever altered. The Union victory in 1865 marked a turning point in American history. The South's defeat not only ended slavery, but also shifted the balance of power towards the federal government. The concept of state sovereignty, so fiercely defended by the Confederacy, lay in ruins alongside the devastated South. The period of Reconstruction that followed saw the federal government take an active role in rebuilding the South and integrating former slaves into society. The passage of the 13th, 14th and 15th Amendments abolished slavery, granted citizenship to African Americans, and protected their right to vote. These were landmark achievements, but they also represented a significant expansion of federal power. The centralization of power wasn't limited to Reconstruction. The Civil War had exposed the weaknesses of a decentralized military system, where states had their own militias. The need for a unified and disciplined fighting force was evident, leading to the creation of the National Guard. This new entity, while composed of state units, could be federalized and called upon by the President to respond to national emergencies or even deploy overseas. This shift towards a stronger federal government was not without its critics. Many feared that the principles of limited government and individual liberty, so cherished by the Founding Fathers, were being eroded. They argued that a centralized government, wielding too much power, could easily become tyrannical and pose a threat to the very freedoms it was supposed to protect. The creation of the National Guard was a direct consequence of the Civil War's lessons. It addressed the need for a unified military force while acknowledging the traditional role of state militias. However, this dual nature also planted the seeds for future debates about federal overreach and the balance of power. On the one hand, the National Guard served as a symbol of national unity. It brought together citizens from different states, fostering a sense of shared purpose and identity. The Guard's role in responding to natural disasters, maintaining order during civil unrest, and even deploying overseas in times of war showcased its importance as a national institution. On the other hand, the federal government's ability to federalize the National Guard, effectively taking control of state troops, raised concerns about potential abuses of power. Some saw it as a way for the federal government to exert its will over states and potentially suppress dissent under the guise of national security. This tension between state control and federal oversight continues to be a point of contention. The National Guard's evolution reflects the broader changes in the relationship between the states and the federal government. While initially conceived as a primarily state-based force, the Guard has increasingly been called upon to support federal missions, both domestically and internationally. This shift has blurred the lines between state and federal authority, prompting ongoing discussions about the appropriate balance of power in a federalist system. The centralization of power after the Civil War wasn't just about military might. It also extended to the realm of finance. The federal government, seeking greater control over the nation's economy, implemented policies that would have far-reaching consequences for states and individuals alike. One of the most significant changes was the establishment of a national banking system. Before the war, banking was largely a state-regulated enterprise. The National Bank Act of 1863 and subsequent legislation created a system of federally chartered banks, subject to national regulations and oversight. While this brought stability and uniformity to the banking sector, it also concentrated financial power in the hands of the federal government. The federal government's increased financial control extended to taxation as well. The Civil War had forced the Union to implement income tax for the first time in American history. Although initially intended as a temporary measure to fund the war effort, the income tax would eventually become a permanent fixture, granting the federal government an unprecedented level of financial control over its citizens. These changes had profound implications for individual liberty and economic freedom. The federal government's ability to levy taxes, regulate banks, and control the nation's currency gave it immense power to influence the lives of ordinary citizens. Critics argued that this financial centralization eroded the principles of limited government and individual responsibility, paving the way for a more intrusive and overreaching federal government.